One of the questions you always have to ask yourself is, what does my opponent think I have? You know, it's important to bet a size on the turn where you're credibly repping more hands. He thinks I have king high, which means he's so much more likely to bluff at a higher frequency. All right, everybody, welcome back. This hand is one of my absolute favorites from the 2023 World Series of Poker, 25K final table, 1.2 million up top, got those steep WSOP payouts. And, you know, in this hand, I actually make a hero call down with king 8 high. And I wanted to break down my logic as to why I did so. And I think it'll really help you think more deeply about the game and understand what some of us are thinking about when we play big spots. So we're going to jump right in. Hand starts out. The stacks are all pretty close here, as you can see on the top left of the screen. And I have 5 million at 160K, so 31 big blinds. And me and Ren are very close in chips. The medium stacks, you know, now kind of have a low bust frequency. And so we're playing like closer to chips than when if there is a extreme short stack. But we're going to do a lot of limping, and we're just going to go from there.
Solving for any and all situations.
The greatest players.
Another really fun aspect of this hand is the table talk that Ren and I have going on. You know, we've been friends for a while. We've battled across the world, and this tournament is no different. So whenever I'm in a hand with Ren, we always have a lot of fun.
In the world that are playing no limit hold'em tournaments, they're actually studying more than they're playing.
Okay.
You're putting in more hours away from the table.
Okay, makes sense. 7-2 senior 4, okay.
Limp blind versus blind confrontation.
So there's not a ton of reason to bet this flop here. I don't have that much deuce X that limps the small blind. He probably has more that checks behind in the big blind. And my hand can be ahead a lot. So I'd rather put this into a checking range with the intention of definitely calling the flop and evaluating on a later street.
Here, advantage Kornuth with
7-3.
king high.
You miss everything.
Can you beat 7-3?
I think I can beat the. What? You got 7 high, right? I think I best hand right now.
So his bet is really just designed to get me to fold better 10 highs, maybe some jack highs, or possibly some weak queen highs. But with king high and 2 overs to the board, I have a very mandatory call here. And then I'll let you know what I'm thinking about the conversation we're about to have.
160K barrel comes
7-3 no good.
No.
Better
With-
fold.
7-3?
a declaration
What?
of thinking he has the
Same
best
hand?
Same hand? Nice. Tap it up.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting because when he does bet, he actually says, I think I have the best hand right now. It is worth mentioning that, like, I don't really believe him. So at that point in the hand, I'm somewhat comfortable that I'd likely have the best hand. So as the hand progresses, we're going to get more into sizings because, you know, looking at the hand, it's pretty simple to say that, like, king high loses to ace high, a 5, a 7, or a jack that's on the river. But based on the sizings as the hand progresses, are those possible combinations that my opponent can have. The logical bluffs that they can have that fire 2 are going to be hands like 3-4, 6-3, 6-4, 6-8, 6-9. I think are all like really good normal combos. Maybe some stuff with heart in them are logical because they can bluff a later street. And so that's kind of like the way that I'm thinking about this at this point. And in general, we're just going to continue to the turn and play our ranges as a check.
Really?
You know, we're laughing about the fact that we both said we had 7-3 and then the 7's a turn.
I don't think you got a 7-3.
I think Ren Lin hoping to have just taken it down there on the flop. A little pot control in position. Sort of have to have an idea where Kornuth is at now. A stubborn king high, ace high type holding, potentially a 5 or a deuce, but what are we doing? Is he going 2 barrels here with the old good buddy? Speech play here as well, Ali. You heard the conversation between these two.
So I will say that I actually really like his sizing here on the turn. You know, it's important to bet a size on the turn where you're credibly repping more hands. So when he chooses 375 into 800, I think that he would probably bet this size with a 7, a 5, or a deuce. I don't think he would bet this size with ace high. I do think that if he checked pre-flop with ace high and bet the flop, he might bet smaller here on the turn. He might check behind. So I'm not really super concerned with ace high anymore. And it's also worth mentioning that I have a pretty dependable live tell on Ren. You know, I'm sure a lot of y'all are going to ask like what that tell is. And honestly, it's like I play super high rollers with this guy. So never in a million years am I going to spill the beans on that one. But part of my logic for calling here is the poker theory. And part of it is that I sense weakness from the other aspect. So with live tells, you always want to use like poker theory first. And then, so if my hand calls sometimes from a poker theory perspective, and then I think that there's a decent chance that my opponent is weak here, well, then I'm just going to call a higher frequency of the time on the turn. So that's like a really good way to think of it. A lot of people kind of think live tells are what they see in rounders, where it's like, oh, the guy, you know, didn't eat the cookies, so he's weak, you know, but like in general, poker first, add live tells, make a decision. From a theoretical perspective, having an 8's not great. Like some of the logical combos that I think he bets flop and turn with that are bluffs are 8-9, 6-8, and 8-4. So having an 8's not great, but it's also, do we think our opponent is bluffing this flop at too high of a frequency in this spot and flop and turn?
King 8 for the 375. Neither player connects with the river.
So this jack is actually a good card for a lot of reasons. You know, my range has ace jack, king jack, maybe some jack X of hearts in it. So it decreases the frequency in which I perceive my opponent will bet a 5 and a 7. If he bets this river, we can add in that logic to whatever sizing he chooses. So let's see what sizing, and then we'll break it down further.
We'll see whether or not a third barrel is on Ren's mind.
And here comes that stare, that glare from Kornuth. He does not believe Ren Lin, and rightfully so. He's got absolutely nothing.
It can be a little discombobulating to be on the receiving end of the optical dress down.
Let it soak in a little bit, Ali. What exactly?
I love the cheap time bank chips WSOP has when everywhere else in the world has like plastic laminated something.
After being called on the flop and again the turn. I think Kornuth can eliminate a hand like ace high as a semi-bluff. This is trips, maybe a river jack.
There's a good number of busted draws out there, though, in the form of hearts.
He bets 950, which is about 2/3 pot. And I don't think he's ever going to choose, I don't think he's ever going to bet a 5 at all. For this sizing, he could bet a 7, I believe, but I don't believe that he would bet a 7 unless his kicker played, so queen 7. Now on the river, since he might even raise a 7 at some frequency pre-flop, he's kind of repping a jack or a deuce. And like a jack on the flop might just start checking the flop because it has enough showdown value, can't really get that many better hands to fold. And so he doesn't have a lot of jack X in his range. And so all of a sudden his range shrivels up to a rare combo of a jack, the one that's very difficult to have or randomly bluffs with too high of a frequency, or a deuce. So it appears with king 8 high here that a lot of hands beat me because the absolute strength of my hand is quite weak. I get beat by a 5, ace high, better king high, etc. But in reality, he never bets a 5. He doesn't bet much 7x, and it's hard for him to get to the river with jack X. So all of a sudden, there's not that many hands that beat us, but a lot of bluffs that he could potentially still have. And so, you know, those are kind of the factors here. So I think from a theoretical perspective, this is actually going to be a reasonable frequency call. Add in the fact that I was, you know, fairly certain that Ren was on the weaker side, and it becomes a pretty easy call.
And straights.
Yeah.
Oh, he wants to call, doesn't he?
Oh, my.
And he's done it.
My God.
To join the 7 deuce. Sorry, man.
Still don't know if he's telling a truth.
King high. I know. Shut. You really call me king high.
So it's also worth noting, he talks about him thinking I have king high, which is plausible from the amount of time I took on the river, limped pre-flop, stuff like that. But I want to take a second to point out the importance of that, is because he thinks I have king high, which means he's so much more likely to bluff at a higher frequency. And so one of the questions you always have to ask yourself is, what does my opponent think they have or think I have? One of the questions you always have to ask yourself is, what does my opponent think I have? And if your opponent thinks you're weak, it's going to increase their bluff frequency. Versus, like, there's going to be some spots where if my opponent thinks I have top pair and they're betting again, what's more likely? They're trying to get you to fold top pair, or they can beat it. So you can often simplify your decision-making process using just that simple, what do they think I have? Would they try to bluff or value bet this way? So that's my take on the situation. Like I said, one of the most exciting hands that I got to play that summer, and I hopefully have a bunch of those opportunities coming up.